It's not until later that I realized Jesus and Seneca are born in the same year. They're both born in provinces of the Roman Empire. They're both enormously, popular philosophers in their own time. They're both put to death by the emperor and sort of go to their deaths very bravely and sort of become a metaphor in that sense. But when you read one of their writings, it sounds like a regular human being who's talking to you, who seems grounded in reality and doesn't think that he's a mystic in any way. And then the other one is speaking in riddles and parables and believes he's the son of God. And you sort of go, I can wrap my head around this one a lot easier. This seems like a person that would exist today. And this one, I maybe need to see a little bit more evidence.
Yes, I'm not sure that Jesus really did think he was the Son of God. I think that may be something that was invented later by the early Christians, especially Paul. I think that Jesus might have been a little bit more modest than that.
Although, even Paul was pretty well versed in philosophy. He had sort of sampled all the different schools before, settling on Christianity.
Yes.
It's also weird, Seneca's brother is in the Bible. That was the other sort of weird convergence of all these worlds that I didn't understand.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Who is he?
Gallo. He's the judge that lets Saint Paul go.
I see. Yes. Okay.
I guess my other thing about religion that I sometimes wonder, you meet very intelligent people, and I'm not saying that, I'm not making a judgment of their intelligence, but I'm always intrigued by religion being the part of one's life where you turn off reason. Like, so someone might be a scientist, someone might be a doctor, someone might be sort of very reasoned based in every other place in their life. And then in this one area, they're like, no, none of that applies here. I've always found that very interesting.
I agree. I think it's very surprising. It is worth asking them exactly what they do believe, however. In some cases, they really do believe the whole thing. But often you'll find that actually they don't believe it. They are sort of religious in a kind of Einsteinian sense. The religion of Spinoza, they don't actually believe anything supernatural. They feel kind of spiritual. They might use that word.
Yes.
They feel, Einstein used the word God as a kind of symbol of that which we don't understand. And he said, what I'm really interested in is, did God have a choice in creating the universe? He really meant by that, is there only one way for a universe to be? He didn't really mean God. Unfortunately, he's much misunderstood, and I think he, in a way, asked for it. But I think you will find that many of these very intelligent people that you meet who describe themselves as religious are probably no more religious than Einstein, which means not religious at all, in the kind of sense that a supernaturalist would understand the word.
It's sort of a compartmentalized part of their life where they're like, I don't look at what's in this compartment. It was filled when I was a kid, or I've handed it over to tradition, and I'm just going to leave some of these assumptions unquestioned or unconsidered.
Yes, that you're now talking about the genuinely religious ones, the ones who really do go to church and actually do claim to believe it, not the Einsteinian kind. I mean, there are some. Francis Collins, for example, the head of the Human Genome Project, is genuinely religious, actually believes in Jesus and Trinity and things like that. And those people are the ones you're now talking about, the compartmentalizing of the mind. But the Einsteinian ones don't need to compartmentalize because it's all one big compartment for them.
How do you think about our ability to do that? Because it's kind of, as frustrating as it can be, it's also kind of fascinating, our ability to apply totally different standards to different parts of our lives, or our explanations for why we do things.
I am mystified by it. I think it's very, very difficult to understand. There are people who take it to really remarkable extent, this compartmentalization. They really do, as it were, leave their mental ability behind when they enter the church. And they seem to have no trouble with it. I mean, there are, well, perhaps the most extreme example. I was told about this by the professor of astronomy at Oxford, who said that he had a colleague in America who has a professorship of astrophysics, writes learned papers, mathematical papers, published in the astronomical journals, which make the assumption that the universe is 13 billion years old, whatever it is, 13, 14 billion years old, and yet privately believe that the universe is only 6,000 years old, and manage to write papers in the astronomical journals whose mathematics makes the assumption of a 13, 14 billion year universe. And yet at the same time, they privately believe something utterly, utterly contradictory. And that is something that I find totally incomprehensible. I cannot imagine that level of compartmentalization.
It's almost impressive.
I gather you can't either.
No, it's impressive in its own kind of perverse way.
Yes, perverse is right.
Yeah, it's strange. I can't quite wrap my head around it myself. Although in another area where perhaps we see this positively, I've always been curious to ask you, what do you think about, like, in 12-step groups or Alcoholics Anonymous? Why do you think the step 4, the idea of accepting a higher power, the people who have experienced what that has done for them sort of swear by it? What do you think about this sort of, necessity is a strong word, but what do you think about the efficacy of needing to, or being forced to accept some kind of higher power? And why does that seem to be a step on the road to conquering an addiction or a destructive life pattern?
That doesn't seem to me to be anything like so mysterious. I think that if you're down, if you're deeply depressed, if you're alcoholic, if you're in despair, I think it's easy to imagine, especially if you're not very bright. I mean, it could easy to imagine that some kind of father figure, some kind of everlasting arms to hold you when you're in distress. That's very understandable. What I can't understand is the intellectual compartmentalization of something like that professor of astronomy, where you have a direct contradiction. But if you're feeling suicidal, if you're feeling deeply depressed, if you're alcoholic, if you're a drug addict trying to escape, I could well imagine that it would be very, very appealing if somebody comes along to you and tells you there's an everlasting father looking after you, beaming down at you from heaven.
I don't know if the step is so much about accepting that there's a benevolent God who's looking out for you. I've always understood the idea of accepting a higher power as part of the recovery process to be about removing the inclination, which has gotten out of control by nature of one's addiction, that one is the center of the universe, or that one is all powerful in their own life. And so there's something to the humility and the accepting of a kind of powerlessness that goes along with that step, that is integral in terms of rebuilding one's life. The self-centeredness that is endemic to addiction or destructive habits is what the acceptance of a higher power is aimed at combating. That's how I've understood it.
That makes a lot of sense too. Yes, I can understand that.